You don't normally get that at the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Let me say.
That's the first whoop in hundreds of years that's happened.
Possibly, possibly since Sir Walter Scott. Welcome, Damian.
Thank you.
Welcome to Edinburgh. I know you're a West Coast boy, so we should maybe get that out the way first.
Wow. I was in a taxi on the way to the train station earlier, and he said, he was dropping me off at Queen Street. He said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Edinburgh." And he said, "You can't have it all." But it is lovely to be here, so thank you all very much for coming out tonight.
I remember when I lived in London, I worked in a hi-fi music magazine, and I was sent up to Glasgow to interview Ivor Tiefenbrunn, who was the head of Lynn Products, who made fantastic high-end stereo equipment. And he said, "Ian, you should come back to Scotland." And I said, "Well, yeah, I probably will move back to Edinburgh at some point." He went, "That's not Scotland." So you know where you stand, But this is a long way in all kinds of ways from where you grew up and how you grew up. So I just want you to take us back to the beginning a little bit and talk about your background.
Well, I mean, it's a funny day for it, because this morning the Royal Society, the National Theatre of Scotland announced that they're making a play of Maggie and Me. Thank you. And I have known about that for some years. I have been writing it. It's not news to me. But I've been co-writing it with a wonderful writer called James Lay. And it's been, extraordinary is probably the easiest single word to use to describe the process of revisiting that childhood and revisiting that life to make it into a play. Because when you're writing a memoir, you go through all the same questions that you go through with fiction, which is, what's my story? What am I going to put in? What am I going to take out? Who am I going to leave out? Which of my many aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff like that, and houses and all that. So, and then you get to a play, and you know this because you've written plays as well, where a book that's 90,000 words has to become a play. It's 30,000 words, and so you're taking more away. But you've also got to add lots of stuff. And so, yeah, it was weird. I was in Carfin Grotto last week, which is where I spent a lot of time as a wee boy. And Carfin Grotto was and is a sort of strangely magical place to me. It's a sort of sanctuary, and I was always safe in Carfin Grotto. The statues are still there that were there. Some of them have changed. The Jesus that I used to think was quite handsome is now completely golden. He's a sort of disco Jesus, which is quite exciting. The Virgin Mary's had a touch up. She's looking a bit fresher. And it's evolved and grown in a way as the community around it's changed. And so it was really being back there last week, and I've been back since, but going back there to take photographs, to talk about the play of, the life that I had then, which is a very different life to the life that I have now, was a kind of miracle. I kind of could see that wee boy, and it was really, I'm going to start crying already. No. But it was really, really emotional. It was really emotional. It was really emotional being back there.
Can we dig down a wee bit deeper into what
sure.
sort of household it was? I mean, when you were growing up, was it a bookish household? Were your parents intellectuals?
Well, I mean, in their way, actually. My mum read a lot, and she was always reading a Mills and Boon. And there's a reason that they're one of the most successful imprints in the world. They know what they're doing. And she loved them, and that was sort of how she taught me to learn to read. And I could read before I got to school. So I was instantly very bored by Peter and Jane and their dog, and I was like, oh, come on, there's got to be more. So she had taught me to read by the time that I got to school, but my dad was never a reader. And I think up until the point that my parents divorced, there were books in the house, but it wasn't like literature. But I was taken to the library, and the library was really important to me. Her library was really important, and the school library was really important because I could get anything I wanted. It was amazing to me that you could go to a library and take books away and not have to give them money, and go back and get more. It was just extraordinary. But my mum had a brain hemorrhage when I was really little. And actually, and I don't talk about this very often, I went to a conference recently of people who had survived brain injury. And I met lots and lots and lots of psychologists and neurologists and therapists of all kinds. And they had said, we'd like you to, they'd read the book and they said, we'd like you to come and talk about your mother's brain injury. And it was not something I'd ever done before. And I realised when I was doing it that although my mum had survived that, and she's an extraordinary person, my mum is extraordinary, she wasn't the same mum. She was not the same mum. I couldn't rely on her in the way that I could, before she went to hospital and she was away for so long. I couldn't rely on her. She couldn't do numbers. She couldn't do facts. She couldn't do times. And as a child, you need that constant, and I didn't have that anymore. So I did have to grow up, very quickly, sort of taking the money out of her purse, to pay for things and stuff like that. And much later, doing bills and and all of those things. And she should have had much more support than she did. But what was really interesting about that conference was that I discovered that I was not alone in this. There were lots of other people who had survived brain injuries, and there's now much more knowledge about it. So, for example, many of the women who are in prison have experienced brain injury and are there as a result of brain injury. And there's a big connection between that and literacy and health and all sorts of things. So I actually helped my mum to learn to read after that, because she had to learn to read again and walk and talk and do all of those things. And I think it was when my mum was away in the hospital, and as a child, I was not allowed to go and visit her. My sister wasn't either. We weren't supposed. I think
you weren't allowed, or it just wasn't expected that you would.
No, I wanted to. We were explicitly not allowed. We were told we weren't allowed to go because it was bad for her or bad for us. It was somehow thought that we shouldn't. And yet, at the same time, at the same age, I remember going to funerals of people in my family. So you were expected to go to a funeral, but you couldn't. Go to a hospital. And so I didn't see her until she came back out. And I remember that the council came and fitted a handrail, and that was how I knew she was home, because this was a change. And so she was back, but she was different. And I wouldn't change her for all the world. She's amazing. But that did mean I got a different mum back at the end of it. And because she was away, she left us with her partner, who she had trusted to look after us. And he didn't do that, did the opposite.
Did the community rally round? I mean, what sort of community we're talking about?
So the community, my mum's still there. She's not in the same place that she was, but she's in the house that if you've read Maggie Me, she's in the house that we ended up in at the end of Maggie and Me. She'll be out of that house in a box, as she's very fond of saying to people.
I said that to some house removers just today.
They were like, it can be arranged.
No. It's just, they moved me into the flat I'm in now, and they said, "Oh, you thinking of moving again?" I went, "No, next time you see me, I'll be in a box." Anyway.
And did you mean it? You're not going to?
Yeah, I'm not going to move until I'm in a while. No. Right, go on. Your mum.
But no. She when we got that house, we went. This is so unbelievable. We went to view the house. It was like, it was my mum wanted her own front, back, and door, And we turned up, and literally they were having the wake for the occupant who was on her way out, and her coffin was in the living room, Mrs. Gibson, and I was like, oh, right, and my mum was like measuring up, and it was great, and anyway, she didn't need it anymore, so she's still in that house, but the community, did absolutely rally around at that point. And has done since. She's had she's continued to have health problems, and she's never, she has a new partner. They have a very good relationship. She's a much calmer life than she used to have in lots of ways, but not always. And she's visited constantly by people, and she's constantly visiting people. I mean, the thing about her is that she never really accepted that she was ill. She never really thought she was. So she'd continue to do things like, run jumble sales for people that needed money raising for them, or, go and visit somebody because they were not well, not really realising maybe what I told it was taking on her to do all these things, but she's always been that kind of person. So and that totally takes after my Granny Mac, who was my mum's mum, who had a personal relationship, very personal relationship with God and the Pope, and who was, like, and when you see, sort of movies where the guy has like watches like that, she'd be like that, holy medals. And she had them on. It was great, and I loved all her stories about it.
As a kid, that would have been irresistible, all those little medals.
Oh, I loved the medals. I loved the medals.
Like collecting cigarette cards or bubblegum cards or something.
Maybe a little bit more spiritually significant than that, Ian. But no, not really. No, it was great. It was like when the sticker albums. You've got to or Pokemon now. You've got to get them all. Got to get all the saints. And the Grotto had a really good gift shop. And I used to go in there and just and they lovely lady who worked there. Would open the big velvet drawers, and there were all the medals and all and I just completely loved it all. So I loved all those stories of the saints. And my husband, who is like English and very not religious at all, just does not understand any of it. And I'll occasionally appeal to a saint in the house, and he's like, "What are you doing? Like, you left your keys there, So,
See, the saint came good.
Yeah, exactly. I'd be like, see, he's Saint Michael.
So where did it all go wrong? Because you ended up going to university in England.
In England. Well, I did have a year at university. It's funnily enough, I was talking this morning about this to my therapist, so I'll just burden you with that now. But she was saying, well, we've never really talked about that year. And I did have a year in Edinburgh. I did have my year at Napier University in Edinburgh. And I think, were you the first in your family to go to university? So, like, the talk of university and what happens when you go to university and the processes of matriculation. What is matriculation? What happens? And the structures, expectations, support, all of that was completely unknown to me. I didn't know any of it. And so my focus as a boy, because I was a boy, was on getting away from home. I had to get away from, I had to get away from abuse. I had to get away from a place where, I was totally convinced somebody was going to try and kill me for being gay. And so my focus was on getting to university. I did not think very much about what I would do once I got there. And it was not a good year for me. I was a spectacularly bad student for the first time in my whole life. Because I think I probably had PTSD, and I don't really think I knew that. And I don't think anybody was looking out for me. I'd left school. The teachers who looked out for me, my friends who looked out for me, they were all gone. So I was in Edinburgh on my own. And the journalism course that I was on, which was very hard to get on, was run by a series of like old goats, essentially, who were, who had very fixed ideas about what news might be and what a story might be and what your role in gathering that would be, and I did not agree. And they moved the campus out to the former institution out by somebody here will know where it is. Well, no, not
Craig
We
Locker.
had another name for Side Hill.
Locker.
Not Craig Locker. Was it Craig Locker? Craig House. That's right.
Craig House campus, yeah.
Craig House. And that was lethal because all the buildings were on really high hills and the frost was horrendous and you had to basically risk your life to get to class. And they sort of did it out there. So, and I did have a year, and I must say, there were some good teachers there too at Napier, and there were some great students in the year above actually who were really helpful and inspiring. But I can't say that I succeeded. I didn't. I failed lots of courses, and I just was not coping very well at that point in my life. And so Edinburgh I found overwhelming. I felt like I didn't fit this narrative of what Edinburgh was. I'd grown up reading about Edinburgh, and so it's extraordinary in a way to be here and to be a fellow of the society and sitting here talking about it, because I just felt like I felt really outside of Edinburgh in that year that I was here. so I did. I dropped out and I left. I went to stay with friends. My girlfriend at the time, which tells you how long ago it was, went to university in Lancaster, and I was like, she's the person that I love most in the world. She's my best friend as well. Whatever else, I'll go there and be with her. And so that's really that, and the fact that Lancaster took me through clearing were the only reasons that I went.
And was that journalism as well?
No, it was English literature and sociology. And I was so poor that you had to have a photograph for your student ID, and I couldn't afford to go and get a photo taken in the photo booth. And so I can laugh about it now because it is quite funny. I found we'd been to a family wedding, and there was a family wedding picture, and I just cut my picture out of the wedding. It was like some sort of symbolic divorcing of myself from my family now that I look back at it, actually. But anyway, and I took that along to the nice ladies, because Lancaster's collegiate, and I took it along to the college secretaries. They were so unbelievably nice to me about it. I can now see that they totally clocked me when I arrived. And they were like, oh, was that a nice wedding? And they chatted to me. And, all throughout my degree there, Lancaster was incredible. And all through my undergraduate degree, they always made sure that, if I was behind on my rent, or I was having to, because I had to work like several jobs, there was always some hardship fund or something made available for me. So they were, they really did get me through university. And I'm very grateful to them for that. And then partway through my degree, I ended up going to Texas. I ended up going to the University of Texas, Austin Hook'em Horns. If there's anybody here, from that there's nobody, that's fine. And I didn't have the money for it. I had a scholarship for the fees.
If Edinburgh felt like a culture shock coming from the West, I can't imagine what Austin must have felt like.
Do you know what, though? It's that weird thing of like, Edinburgh was close enough to be strange. Texas was so far away, it was like another world. I remember like my first week there, thinking, I'm going to go to this place, and I looked at it on a map, and I started to walk. The police pulled me over about 45 minutes later and put me in the back of a car and took me right back to where I was going. I thought, you could at least take me the other way. And they were like, we're not a taxi. It's not a cab. So no, it was, but that was an amazing year. And that really, I got so much confidence that year about my writing. I did proper journalism for the first time there for the City newspaper, the Austin American Statesman, and a brilliant journalist called Michael Barnes. A really very esteemed arts journalist, and he was great. And I remember the first piece that I gave to him, and he late. That was my first mistake. Second mistake, it was far too long. And he came back to me and said, I'm going to tell you all the ways that this is wrong, and we're going to make it better together. And so what he did was he drove me. We drove from Austin to Dallas to go and see an opera, and it was Carmen. We drove, and all the way in the car, on the way up, it was like, this is what's wrong with it, and all the way in the car, on the way back, it was like, this is how you make it better. And I learned so much on that car journey. And I also did a writing class there called E325M, Advanced Expository Writing with Professor John Trimble. And he was a loon. And it was sort of like something from The Secret History. And he was just this charismatic, charming man. It was like writing boot camp. If you got in, that you had to live for that class and socialise with the other students and write and read each other's work the whole time. And I did that for a semester, and then hung out with all the students afterwards. And
was the plan always to be a journalist, or at the back of your mind was the notion of writing longer form?
I don't know about you, but I didn't know any writers. I didn't think it was a job. I didn't think it was a job. I didn't think that you could do it. I mean, Liz Lockhead is from my village, and she's amazing, but I also thought she was dead because we were taught her in higher English and everybody else was dead, so I just assumed that she was dead. And then imagine my shock when she turned up, and I was like, she was like, I'm Liz Lockhead, and I'm like, aye, so yeah, I'm Liz Lockhead. Oh, you really are Liz Lockhead. So I didn't honestly think that it was possible. And so I thought journalism was the best. And I love being a journalist, and it's a great facility that you can always call on when you need to do something really quickly. Somebody phones you at 10 o'clock, we need 1,000 words by 2. You know that you can do it. But actually, it is entirely counterproductive to writing prose. I find, anyway, that it's a different gear. And so I did when I started at the Times, which was my first job out of university, and I would meet these writers who were alive and talk to them about their books and begin to think maybe. Not this is something I can do as in like I have the skills or the craft, but there are people who do this. How do you then get to do this? But it was my love of books that made me start my Literary Salon, which is how I got to then interview lots of writers and talk to lots of writers, and it was what made me think, well, actually, nobody's ever going to say, I think you should sit down and write a book. You know, you have to want to do it. You have to want to abscond from your real life, and you have to accept that it means you're not going to be able to do all the things you want to do, but it has to be the most important thing. And so I did, you know, I started to write what became Maggie Me. I had wanted to write a novel. I didn't want to write a memoir because I got sent a lot of novels that to me should just have been memoirs, because it's like, come on, really, David, you know, blah, you've changed one name, you know, on the front cover or whatever it is, or something like that. But of course what happened was I started writing a novel, and it was like a very thinly disguised memoir, and I thought I might as well just do a memoir. And then of course came all the attendant anxieties of that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about writing a novel is you can hide behind it.
In plain sight.
Yeah, whereas with a memoir, the people you're writing about are going to be there reading it at some point and know that it's them that you're writing about, as opposed to fictional characters. So that's that's something you've got to take on board when you start the project.
Yes, and I wish I'd thought more about that when I started. Thank you, Ian. That's great advice. If anybody's listening out there and you're thinking of starting a memoir, but I mean, I instantly heard my granny Mac being like, you know, you'll be the talk of the steamy and talk of the washoes and shut up and don't, you know. And of course, I also heard my stepfather who told me nobody would believe me about what was being done to me at home, and if I told them, you know, other things would be done to me and to the people I cared about. So it was very hard to think, oh, I'm going to write all this down. And I know there are people in the audience who have written memoirs and who are writing memoirs, and you know, there's this sense that people think it's sort of self-indulgent somehow, or that it's narcissistic, and it's absolutely not. It's like performing surgery on yourself without an anaesthetic in public, you know, it is, but it is also, you do have, because having done a novel since then, the engagement, the relationship you have with readers is different than with a novel. I think that in a memoir, you put something of yourself on the line that you, as you said, you don't do with a novel, or you don't do, but, or maybe you do, but people don't know that you're doing it. You know, because there's loads of stuff in my novel that really is just stuff from my memoir that I didn't put in, that I gave to another character, and like nobody's clocked it, and I'm like, great, we'll do that again with the next one as well, shall we? There's more stuff. So I think fiction does give you a sort of shield. Whereas memoir doesn't. But there's different risks and rewards.
Well, I mean, let's jump to the fiction, because I think it was probably a surprise to many of your readers, your fans, people who knew you. The obvious thing to write about would have been a novel set in Scotland, possibly with a young, you know. But no, you went in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
Why that story?
It's so interesting because it was the story that I had to write at that point in my life. And I knew that people expected me to write like maybe a Scottish story or a gay Scottish story or something like that. And I feel, like, why should I do what you want me to do, A? And B, this was the story I had to tell, because the boy that is the central character in You Will Be Safe here is inspired by a real life boy. And this real life boy was murdered in South Africa, horrifically. He was sent by his mum to a camp which promised to make, you know, men out of boys, run by white extremists, terrifying place. I've been there. And it was a tragic, awful story. Perhaps the most tragic and awful thing about it is that it disappeared like that because there's so much violence in that part of the world. And I just was sort of obsessed with the story of that boy. And I did initially think I would write non-fiction about it because I sort of thought, my God, there's this network of these camps, there are all these places, this is a legacy of empire. It's so clear that there's a relationship here between the past and the present. And actually what I felt was that, and it was a really clear, strong feeling, was that this has to be a novel because I cannot answer all these questions, and also I cannot take anybody's side in this. I have to be free to join these dots and also leave space in the book for the reader to do some work and make up their own mind and challenge them a bit, because the history of empire is when I was at school, is not a history that was taught. And certainly the Boer War, which had a huge impact on the economy of this country, on the politics of this country, the whole of the United Kingdom and of Europe. You know, in the European press depicted Britannia as this brutal mistress and the British bulldog as savaging children. I mean, it was absolutely terrible. You know, we knew what was happening in those camps, those concentration camps that we built, where tens of thousands of women and children
we basically
and men
invented
died.
the concentration
Well, we more or less did, and you know, and there's you know, Hitler cites that, you know, the British concentration camps and the American experience with indigenous people as inspirations. And of course, in neighbouring Namibia, Germany then went on to do even more terrible things. So for me, I was discovering this history. I didn't know this history. I felt stupid. I was like, why don't I know this? This is a big thing about, you know, so many Scottish people went there and were involved at a very senior level in the administration of those camps. And so I wanted to tell this history that I didn't know about, and I also wanted to, you know, the story of the boy, the book opens with the boy and the book ends with the boy, because I feel like what happens to him in that book really is the result of 100 years of history. Really kind of stuff that happened 100 years before put him where he was. So it's not the real life boy, but it's inspired by him. And I went and spent time with his mother, and I went to those camps and I went to those places. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't think it's what people expected, and it's not what I expected. But it's what I had to do.
It has extraordinary resonances with what we're going through just now in politics, I think, with immigration and with asylum seekers, and with difference.
Yeah.
With people who are different being locked up, trying to change them, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this notion of Rwanda is fascinating to me because, you know, what Britain did, the United Kingdom did then, was we took men, it was mostly men and boys, very young boys, away from their families in what would become South Africa, and we shipped them all over the world. So we've been doing this for a really long time. We sent them to St. Helena, you know, all these islands which still have now populations of Boer, of Afrikaans-speaking people, and we did that then. We were like, right, okay, we're going to break this movement up. We're going to break the spirit of these people. We're going to do this. I'm not saying that, you know, that was right. That those people were wrong, but that's something that happened. And people have no awareness of, I think, that we did that then, and so this is not a new idea for us.
Yeah. I think, I mean, since we're in this place and we're in this city, we should maybe point out that I think I'm right in saying Sir Arthur Conan Doyle got his knighthood not for his Sherlock Holmes stories, but for his propaganda work during the Boer War and his support of the government during the Boer War.
Yeah.
We're sitting here, we're in a place that is known for its scientific endeavours. It's full of scientists and people working at the very forefront of new ideas and new technologies. We write stories.
I know.
What are we doing here? What can we add to this august institution?
I feel like come and rumble us at any moment and send us out. I think the thing is that I have a friend, Dr. Simon Locke. He works in the Public Understanding of Science, which is the unfortunate acronym of PUS.
Surely we could change that to coupon.
No, coupons, exactly, coupons. But he, you know, what's been really interesting, you know, observing his work is that, of course, the science is full of stories already. You know, artificial intelligence we were talking about earlier reflects the biases and prejudices that the humans who make it have. So science is not without stories and not without humanity. You know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I think once we sort of accept that it isn't neutral, then we accept that there are sides and arguments and stories already in that. So I think there's a really interesting interface where writers can problematize some of the truths that scientists have or seek. And I'm really interested in hearing from them about, like how wild is quantum mechanics? Like sentences you didn't think you'd hear tonight from me, but there we are. But like, an object existing in two different places at the same time. There's a writer there's a story, like an incredible plot, like, right there. So I think that's what we have to, hopefully that's what we have to bring to this, is a desire to problematize the accepted truths of science, but also to have them maybe hold a wee mirror up to us as well. I mean, I wanted to be a doctor. That's the terrifying thing. I wanted to be a medical doctor because of what happened to my mum, and so I grew up doing sciences at school. I was
going to say, was there any pressure on you as the clever kid in your house to I mean, with me, I was supposed to become an accountant.
Right.
The notion, if you're working classes, you go to university to
do
get
something
a trade,
useful.
To get a trade.
That's right. Yeah.
So that you can keep your parents in a lifestyle to which they would like to become accustomed in later life. And when I was going to do accountancy until it turned out I wasn't much good at economics.
Right.
And
hasn't stopped lots of economists, but
also storytellers in different ways. So I had to explain to my parents what I really was interested in was literature, and that I wanted to come to Edinburgh and study literature. And they went, "What kind of job are you going to get with that?" I said, "I'll come back to Cowdenbeath and be a teacher." That was what they did. You went off to uni, you did English, then you went to teacher training college, then you went back to your hometown, more or less. And you taught, because that was a job you could
And you taught the children of people you knew.
Yeah, we had a lot of that in our school, and it was fantastic. But no, so that's the thing about, so you saying, I'm going to go and do journalism, was that, were people scratching their heads?
Well, no, because I think they knew that I was nosy, and that seemed the logical place for me to be put in. But I mean, they also knew I wasn't going to go and do medicine, but I did tell my mum that I was going to do it for ages and ages and ages, and I think she did. But I have since done my PhD, so I am now Dr. Barr. And I think that's given her some, reassurance. It's like, I can really close read that text for you, Mum. If there's an emergency text, I can absolutely handle that for you. So, but yeah, no, there was a sort of expectation that being a journalist, would be useful. But I mean, I did actually get a job in journalism and do it for a long time. But I think journalism's changed so much. I mean, journalism is now very much not as accessible as it was. There was more local press. As a working class person, you could progress. Now you're sort of expected to be able to intern for free forever. I mean, there are places resisting that and changing that and stuff, but definitely, when I got my job at the Times, I was like the only person from a council house there. But there was a way, there was a pathway.
You must have been after Harry Ritchie's time then.
Well, I didn't meet Harry.
No, because Harry was deputy literary editor, and he was definitely working. He's a Wraith Rovers fan like me. He's definitely working class.
He wasn't. I don't remember.
No, he must have moved on. He must have moved on.
He must have. But yeah, I mean, there were definitely people with castles. That was
yeah. That's how you tend to get in and go up the greasy pole for sure. What do you? I mean, you've touched on it earlier, but can you see any positives for the creative industries, as we must horribly call them, from things like AI? Or is it all negative? It just seems like doom, doom, doom at the moment.
I mean, it's what I said earlier. It's how people use it. Like, it could be so useful. Like, right now I'm researching a lot of stuff about 1933, and it would be really great if there was a friendly wee AI program where I could be like, tell me what people ate in Glasgow in 1933, and it could give me like recipes. That would be lovely. Or pictures or something like that. So I think it could be a really useful research tool, and we know that in science it is already. So we know that artificial intelligence is able to predict certain cancers and heart attacks, and it's progressing every day. I feel like we're learning stuff there. I think that in the arts or in the creative industries, we have to be really clear that people are trained, they're talented, their jobs need to be protected. For them, but also for us. We benefit from their genius, their talent, their insight, their humanity. And when we can't divorce people from their humanity, it's dehumanizing for them, and I think it's dehumanizing for us. So no, I would hate to see that. And I think things like having your book jacket not designed by AI, not having your voice taken for to be used to narrate audiobooks and things like that. So I do feel quite, as you can tell, I feel quite strongly about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And we both had our novels pilfered by ChatGPT for books 3. So yeah, I'm not thrilled about it.
Yeah, they're scraping people's books so that they can produce new books that they don't have to pay the author to write.
Yeah, and they're already for sale on Amazon. You can go onto Amazon and buy books written by, you and me that aren't written by us. And yeah, and I just would hate, to think that A, they were better than me, and B, and B, that somebody was sort of making money somewhere along the line from that. I do not like that idea. So I do think it has great potential, but it's like all new technologies. It has to have a humanity maintained within it. Otherwise, it won't be good for us at all.
I mean, I've always liked you, Damian, because you're a huge supporter of books and writers, and always have been. The Literary Salon that Damian used to run, it ran for many years in London. It would bring authors along and just introduce them to a live audience, sometimes for the first time. To latterly, the Great Scottish Book Club, which puts unknown poets on with bestsellers from all around the world and gives them a stage, gives them a voice, and gives them a new readership.
Yeah, it really does.
And I just think that's an extraordinary thing. I mean, how important do you think it is that writers present themselves to not just sit in a garret, but actually get out there and do stuff in front of an audience?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. We sort of have this idea, don't we, that it's an expectation or an obligation that you have to do now. And there's nothing worse than a writer who's been forced onto social media. Bless them, they just look tragic on Instagram, going, "I'm here, buy my book." And it's like, oh no, just stop.
The unboxing video.
Yes, the unboxing
where
video.
they take all their new books out of the box.
Oh, it's a wee shame.
And you got sent one early in an envelope. You've seen it before. It's not the first time you're seeing this book.
I know. So I think obviously all of that is terrible and should be outlawed. But I think, though, that when we think about the role of writer as a public intellectual or as a public participant in a discourse is really interesting because, Dickens made so much money touring. Oscar Wilde made so much money touring. And I think that, that there has always been a place for that. And I love it. I mean, I love getting to meet readers and talk to readers and hear from them. And I sometimes think, you should do the book tour before the book, because very often they'll come along and tell you things, which, even if they're correcting you, is useful. I was in Adelaide on tour just before the pandemic, and I met a woman whose father had fought in the Boer War. Like, she was in her 80s. They had her late, and she was able to tell me about her father going away to war, what he saw, what happened to him, and when he got back. And then she said, in the place that we're sitting, it's this lovely park in Adelaide, she said, this used to be the train station, this is the platform where my dad left. And I'm sitting there going like, oh my God, could I not have met you 3 years ago? That would have been great. So I think that that level of, is good if you're good at it and you like doing it. My problem is I like doing it too much, and I have to sort of say to myself, no, I'm not going to go and get involved in that, or, try that recipe or go to that bar or whatever, because I've actually got to sit down and write my bloody book. So that's my temptation.
But or my play.
Or my play, that as well. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I'm intrigued about how you can take a memoir and turn it, because I take it the play is fiction, is more like fiction than memoir, or is it more like memoir than fiction? Is it true to the book?
It's recognisably the book for people who've read it, but if you've not read the book, you'd be able to go to the play and be in the world. So, and we had to make some we didn't have to. It came about because I was working on the TV series, and I was finding it so constraining, this idea of how it had to be, the arc of an episode, all of that sort of stuff. That's why telly's enjoyable, but it wasn't satisfying for me as a writer. I was like, oh, I'm not pushing myself in this way. I'm not pushing the material. I'm not interrogating it. I'm not being honest with myself, really. And that was the point I was doing my PhD, and I thought there are some questions here that are interesting about what is truth, who gets to say what's true, who gets to say what's not in a family, in a culture, in a political party. Not naming any names, but so that was all really interesting to me, and that's sort of where the play came from. So I'm trying to think how much I'm allowed to say. I mean, we have Maggie Thatcher is a character in the play. She appears on stage behind a bulletproof screen on the West Coast. On the East Coast, she's not. I mean, she will be there, and in a weird kind of sort of narcissistic, strange, confusing moment, there are two versions of me.
Stuff you can do on a stage that you can't necessarily do in other media.
Yeah, and it's so, and so to your question, so like, is that fiction? Is that memoir? Well, when you read that memoir, the 28-year-old who was writing that book is there, but and it's only happening because of him. But none of him is in there, and so I wanted to sort of tell the story of what was happening in between the lines. And that is in direct opposition to a lot of what's happening on the page. So it's kind of dramatizing the process, but also looking much more at that wee boy and what he wanted and needed at that time. So, I mean, I'm working with James. James Lay is a brilliant writer. He wrote a play called Love Song to Lavender Menace about a gay bookshop in Edinburgh, a famous one. And
I have appeared in it.
You were in it, that's right.
Yeah.
You were in it.
One of many writers when it did an Edinburgh run, and they'd have a writer in the audience every night who would walk on stage and say, "Have you got this book?" And you could name any book you wanted, and then they would sort of riff on that.
He asked me to do that role.
Did you not do it?
No, you did it instead. No, he did.
Joe Clifford did it. Lots of us did it.
No, he did. I was asked to do it, and that's how I met him, because I didn't know who he was, and I had not read the play. And I read.
Did you know the
play.
bookshop?
I didn't know the bookshop. It had gone when I got here. I think by then it was called Wilds or something like that. Maybe it was down by the Blue Moon Cafe. It was great, and I thought, what a great play, what a great writer, and so we've been writing it together, which is also quite strange because you're saying to this person, I'll write this bit, and he'll, well, I'll write that bit, and you're sort of entrusting them with your life because it is. Not your life, but your life that you've lived, and so that is quite a process, because of course he sees things that I don't see, and it's great, and I've learned a lot from him about that moving from page to stage thing. So and of course we've got a director called Shubha Das, and there's a big team of people at NTS, which I'm thrilled to say seems to be a reasonably well-funded arts organisation in the world. And full of good people. So
you've segued nicely into my last question before I throw it open to without you knowing this, because before I throw it open to the audience, we will have a roving mic as well. So we'll get your questions, get them ready in your head right now. It isn't actually my question; it's a question that was suggested by the RSE.
Okay.
It's kind of a double. It's actually two questions. I think is Scotland doing enough for the creative industries? What can national academies and other institutions like the RSC do for the creative industries? So it's quite a big question. And of course, now you live in Brighton, you don't have to think too much about the Scottish angle to that.
I I think about it all the time because I do spend a lot of time here. A lot of my work is here. And
National Theatre of Scotland is here.
National Theatre of Scotland is here. But it is something that I think about a lot because I think that in Scotland, actually more is being done for the arts in Scotland than it is in England. I think of people that I know who work across the arts, different artists, applied artists, ceramicists, painters. So there is more support than there is in England. But is there enough support? No, there is not. And my head is burling right now trying to work out what's happening with that 6.6 million or whatever it is in cuts that's been reversed, it's back. It's like the can of cuts. Like I can't work it, can't work it out. So I do think that more can be done. I think Heather Parry, the writer who edits Extra Teeth, tweeted the other day saying something about how the city of Berlin spends many dozens of times more on arts and culture than does the country of Scotland. And so that can't be right. It's not right for our economy. It's not right for our polity, for our civil life. So I think more has to be done, and there has to be certainty for arts organisations so that they can invest in people and work and new work. And we can't just keep hearing from us. We need to hear from new people, and that has to be like a big reflection of what Scotland is. So I do think it's really interesting and revealing that BBC Scotland commissioned a big Scottish book club, and that when that happened, BBC Two then got a books show. So I feel like I feel very proud of the potential and what is being done here. But I do think that more could be. I do think that more could be done. Like just really simple things. And this is one of the things I'd love to work with the RSC on, with an economist who knows what they're doing. But it's like, it is not a fair fight for bookshops, for independent bookshops. It is not a fair fight for them. And what can be done at a government level to support independent bookshops, which are anchors of high streets and support communities, not just physical communities, but notional communities, identity-based communities, all that kind of stuff. So I do feel like I sound like I'm launching an election bid. You heard it, no. And I do think that that's something that can be done.
Bookshops and libraries are the kind of bedrock that everything else is built on.
They absolutely are. And I'm horrified recently when North Lanarkshire Council was announcing that again they were going to close that library that I described right at the beginning of this, where I'd spent so much time as a wee boy. I was like, no, you're not. That is not happening. It cannot happen. That library is one of the few places that people can go in that village that is free, that is heated, that is safe, that is quiet. Somebody knows them. They can do, they can do their benefit stuff online. There's a great book bug group for kids. There's mental health check-ins. There's all of this stuff happening in libraries. And the notion that they are sort of dusty, lovely reserves of the middle class is a fiction. And so they do need to be protected, and they do need to be funded.
Hooray! I think we can all agree. I'm sure we'll all agree with that.
Yeah.
Right. Audience participation. We're going to have some audience participation now. Is there a roving mic? I can't remember. Two roving mics. Excellent. Two roving mics. One side of the room, one the other side of the room. So put your hand up. I'll direct a microphone to you at your seat. And if you wait till a mic is in front of you before you ask your question. Who's got a question for Damian Barr? Right at the front here. Can we come right down to the front? Mics are coming.
Maggie Me is a wonderful book, and I just wonder who you think the play will speak to and how it will speak to them in a different way from the book, because they might not be able to choose not to access the book.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your nice words, and thank you for your question. It will hopefully reach a different audience of people who haven't read it, and I hope people who have read it don't go, oh my God, the book's better, just read the book, that kind of thing. But I think that I think for me, I'm asking different questions with it, and so I think that that's what's hopefully going to help me reach a different audience. It's really important to me that it's accessible. So we're doing a project with NCL, which is the college that's built on the site of the Ravenscraig. We're working with the film and TV department there. They're making a wee documentary. They're making like the making of Maggie Me. How hilarious is that? And I'm trying to work with NTS to make sure that we're involving as many younger people as possible in the production, so that they're actually learning about a thing that's also about the place that they're from. So I do not want it to be a sort of imposed like some kind of creative poll tax on the community. It's a story from a place that hasn't been told in that way. So I think there's something really powerful about putting a story in a book. A book makes something a thing. I think the same is also true of a stage. It gives a world, a use, and a way of being seen. So, like, for example, one of the things I really want to happen in it is for people to see the Bing, which is like coal slag heaps and old fridges and cars and whatnot, which I'm making just like sound like nobody wants to see that, do they? But actually, there was a strange kind of beauty in it, because there was animals there and there was plants there and it glittered and it was my childhood. And so I want to show places like that and sort of memorialize them. And I'm hoping that people will want to come and see that. And I'm really aware that younger audiences, for them, it will be history, because I regret to say that I am now living in a period drama. And that is just sad but true.
I used to love the bings around Carden Den.
Oh, great.
They were smouldering.
On your BMX?
They smouldered.
Yeah.
No, I'm pre-BMX, man. We were chopper bikes. But they smouldered because the kind of coal was alight.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And then when you got to the top, there was this sort of Martian landscape with kind of black goo that was all barriered off so you couldn't go in and drown in it.
Yeah, and there were all the stories about the boys. It was always boys who did.
Yeah, I know, but that's all gone now. It's all been landscaped and cleaned up and everything, and for the better.
Yeah.
Everybody says.
And are there houses on it now? Probably?
No houses.
Oh, there's houses on my bing.
Oh my God, no.
I know. I feel really territorial. I feel like going up and chapping somebody's door and be like,
yeah, this is my territory.
my bang.
Okay, another question, please. Right at the back this time. The lady at the back, keep your hand up. And yep, Mike is coming towards you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Damian, I don't want to misquote you, but during COVID, you put a quote on social media about us all being in the same storm, but in different ships.
Yeah, we're not all in the same boat, but we are in the same storm.
That's it. Thank you. I wondered if you could maybe talk about how important it is for you to use your platform to, I guess, kind of raise marginalised voices and talk about the things that people don't often want to talk about.
That was a really strange moment during lockdown because basically I was really sick of people saying, oh, you know, we're all in the same boat, and I was like, no, you're not. You're not in the same boat. Like, you're not a key worker who can't afford the delivery from Waitrose, so you can try sourdough bread if one more person did that. You know, it's fine for people who can, but not everybody can, so don't make the assumption. And I was just kind of angry about it, and because I knew how much my own family was struggling, and I knew how much we were going to struggle within a short period of time. So I did that tweet and I did not think anything about it. And it was picked up by a journalist called Peggy Noonan, who put it in her column in, I think, the Washington Post. And basically it just sort of went completely, I don't want to say viral in the context of COVID, but like it was, you know, I have. So anyway, you know, it was there and it was in the world and it was so strange. And people were like, Oprah just quoted you on her podcast, and George Takei, Michelle Obama. And I was just like, what is happening? This is too much, you know. But what was really interesting was when it left the Anglosphere, and people, because you could follow the infection waves around the world when you knew that people were starting to get sick, when you saw it in different scripts and different languages, and then it would sort of start to come back to me. So, and I thought that was a moment. I thought that was the life of that. But interestingly, it continues to be shared by people. It's often used by scientists, epidemiologists use it. A lot in presentations.
I believe Michelle Mons used it a couple of times.
Oh, great, lovely. Nobody's on Michelle's boat. That's
nobody's allowed on
Nobody's
her boat.
allowed on it. That's because it's in the jail. But no, and anyway,
just cut that from the recording.
but it got made. It became a film. That quote became a film called The Same Storm. So there's a director called Peter Hedges, who made a film that I love called What's Eating Gilbert Grape with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh, yeah.
And I got this email and it was from Peter Hedges and I was like, well, that's a funny name to have. And he said, you know, I'm making a film on Zoom with all these actors who are out of work and we want to talk about the pandemic. And I was driving through New York, there was nobody there, and a cinema had put that quote of mine up on the front in the cinema letters and he'd seen it. And he said he stopped his car and he just cried. And he felt like this had crystallized for him what was happening, the inequality in America, you know, where he was, in New York State, I think it was. And anyway, and so there's this like amazing film with all these incredible actors in it, none of whose names I can remember at this point. I think Judith Light is one of them. Sandra Oh, I think, it's absolutely amazing. They did it all on Zoom, and it's called The Same Storm, and it's the story of care workers in different families and stuff like that. So it does feel really important to me, and also I'm very happy for people to use it. But what I'm not happy about is that it's often put in the context of a really bad poem that I didn't write. And it's this like really awful poem, and I don't know who wrote the poem, but and then that quote is like the last two lines. If you're here, the person who wrote the poem, I'm like, no, that wasn't me.
He's
So I
reclaiming his
disavow
copyright.
the rest of it, but I do.
Reclaiming his copyright. I think we've got time for one, maybe two more questions. The gentleman in the second row, if we can get the mic down to him briskly. Thank you very much. We might manage to get one last one in. We'll
I'll
see.
try and be more concise.
Yes, try and be more concise.
Sorry.
Pretend you're a poet.
I've got a couple of questions,
Again.
if I may.
Right.
In Maggie Me, the one thing I loved was this, almost like the soundtrack of the time. And will music be an important part of the play? And also, you're working on new work. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, right. So the soundtrack of Maggie Me is, I did make a Spotify playlist. But, you know, so it's all the sort of the TV theme tunes of the time and the music that I would be listening to. But it was also all, like, I put on all these like Orange songs and stuff because I grew up listening to those marches and things like that. And people quite quickly were offended by some of my music choices. Like, I'm not judging them, I'm just telling you what I heard when I was growing up, you know. So I took them off. But anyway, the music will be a big part of it. Yes, a really big part of it. Obviously, I won't be singing or anything like that because that would be criminal. But
New
yeah,
project.
music's a big,
New project?
Yeah, so not ever a project.
New project?
No, I remember once Keris Matthews being like, "Come on, we were doing an event
No,
together."
what is your new project?
Oh, what's the new project?
What are you working on just now?
Oh God!
Or tell us about
New
Keris
project
Matthews.
is a story. It was a tambourine. It ended badly. The new project is a novel. And I'm doing it with Canongate Books here in Edinburgh, and I'm very pleased to be being published by them, and they're brilliant. And it's I've said before what it is, and I could say the same again. It's a big gay Scottish love story.
Is that the title?
Should have been the title. If in America, you know how they always want a subtitle, that might just be the subtitle in America. Actually, we've just got that. And it's based on some real people. But I'm again taking the details and fictionalising them, so it's sort of like a remix. But it's some people that I've been obsessed by since I discovered them during lockdown, and I just sort of, you know, I love them. And I actually am having to do some strategic unloving of them right now because I realised that I've just made them really nice, and actually they were often quite horrible. So I'm doing that now. So the novel is on its way. I was writing it this morning.
These are people who will not be able to recognise themselves in the novel.
They're dead.
So I mean,
they're dead.
Who says COVID didn't have a silver lining?
They've been dead for a long time.
Okay,
They've
fine.
been dead for a long time. I had no part in their death.
See, that's exactly what you would say.
That's
exactly what a killer would say.
Can say that. That's exactly what I would say.
That's exactly what you'd say.
I played no part in the deaths of those men.
All right. Listen, apologies, we have run out of time. We've not got time for any more questions. Damian, Damian's interviewed me a couple of times in person in London and for his television show. It's lovely to turn the tables.
Oh.
Lovely to turn the tables.
Thank
and of
you.
course, I didn't get through any of the questions I was given by the RSE and got through only a few of the questions that I'd written up myself. So we'll need to do it again sometime.
Oh, right,
we need to do it again sometime.
Cool.
But meantime, Sir John, thank you for hosting tonight's event. Thank you to the Royal Society of Edinburgh for inviting us along and for putting on tonight's event, and all the staff behind the scenes doing all the hard work. And thanks to you, the audience, for coming along and showing your appreciation on a cold night in November in Edinburgh. But please, most of all, can you thank fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, Damian Barr.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.